Hi guys, welcome to the next set of your notes. We're going to start off by just reviewing the last couple slides of your previous notes. We left off on the functions of the bronchi. The bronchi are, remember those big tubes, the brown ones right here, that lead into the lungs from the trachea. Now, the right bronchus, this guy right here, is actually going to be a little bit straighter and wider than the left, which means if you ever inhale food, that it usually gets stuck in this bronchus. Okay, it's going to be this one because it just kind of falls straight down the tube right over here. Let's see, next. If we were to follow our bronchi all the way down through the primary, secondary, and out to the tertiary bronchi or bronchioles, we would see these little bronchioles. They're tiny. Remember, they're like a millimeter, and they end in these little grape-like sacs called alveoli. And these are our tiny air sacs that are covered in capillaries. So they're covered in those really tiny, thin blood vessels. The alveoli are actually where gas exchange occurs. So that's where carbon dioxide and oxygen are being exchanged. Now, the one thing we haven't got to is the lungs, and in a way we kind of have, because we've talked about the bronchioles and the alveoli, but those two things combined are kind of what make up the lungs. A lot of times people think of the lungs as like an empty sac, and it's not that at all, actually. Really, lungs are more like a big sponge with a lot of tiny tubes running through them, and those tiny tubes are called the bronchioles, and remember, they always end in these alveoli. Now, the lungs themselves have no muscles, but there are muscles inside the lungs that specifically surround the bronchi and the bronchioles. And as these muscles contract and relax, it actually regulates the size of the passageways. So the passageways can, the passageways can get smaller or bigger depending on what the body needs. Now your lungs are going to be divided into what we call lobes, and your left side has two lobes. Remember, the left lung is like slightly smaller, and it's got a superior, so it's this whole piece up here, superior lobe, and an inferior lobe down here. The right side, on the other hand, is a little bit larger, and it actually has three lobes: the superior, the middle, and the lower right. Now, one of the most important things our respiratory system does, not one of, but the most important thing our respiratory system does, is undergo gas exchange. So this is exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and it occurs across the walls of the alveoli and the capillaries. Now, both the capillaries and the alveoli are just a very, very thin-walled structure. So it's like literally one single layer of tissue covering the outside of each one of those. So it's really easy for things to diffuse across the membrane. And the reason that diffusion occurs is because the air that we breathe in is really high in oxygen, and our blood is going to be low in oxygen. And when things diffuse, they always move to an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So there's no active process here. It's all a passive process. So the oxygen just flows right across the membranes from the lungs into the blood, and carbon dioxide does exactly the opposite, from the blood out to the lungs. So the air we breathe is about 21% oxygen. That's what O2 is, 21% oxygen, and only 0.04%, carbon dioxide. Now, the air we exhale is going to be less than 15% oxygen. So we take over 6% of the oxygen in the air, and we exhale about 4% carbon dioxide. So that's a pretty big difference, 0.04 to 4. So that's an increase of 4% in carbon dioxide that we're exhaling. All right, so if we're going to talk about breathing, it's important to understand that there are no muscles in the lungs or connected directly to them that actually help you breathe. Air is moved into the lungs by good old air pressure, the diaphragm, and your rib muscles. So you have all these muscles inside of your ribs that help expand your rib cage. And you have this diaphragm that can relax and contract. Now, as the diaphragm contracts, it pulls down, okay, the diaphragm right here. It's this kind of thin layer of muscle that divides the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. As it contracts, it pulls down. At the same time, it's pulling your lungs downward, and that causes air to flow in. And when it relaxes, it kind of folds back in and it pushes the air out. And this inhalation or breathing in and exhalation or breathing out is what we call breathing. So more specifically, when we're talking about inhalation, it's really important to note the diaphragm, like I just explained. It is that large dome-shaped muscle at the bottom of the chest cavity, and it contracts and flattens during inhalation. So like I said, pulls down and becomes flat. Air flows in. Rib muscles are also contracting to raise the rib cage, so it kind of goes up and out during your inhalation. And the reason why air flows in is because this pulling on this chest cavity causes a vacuum and air just flows right into the lungs. Now, if we're talking about exhalation, this is usually a passive process. And that means that it doesn't require any energy. And the diaphragm and rib muscles in exhalation are just relaxing. So the diaphragm relaxes, ribs fall, and it forces the air out. Now, we know that we can do a forceful exhalation, kind of like when you need to blow out a candle. That's a forceful exhalation. And that's just caused by a vigorous contraction of your diaphragm and rib muscles. So if you were to like hold your ribs and try to blow out a candle, you would feel that forceful contraction of those muscles. This exhalation and inhalation only work because the chest is a sealed cavity, meaning that there's no holes in it other than the opening, the primary opening here. Now, if we were to puncture this cavity, like put a hole in it, then it could make breathing difficult, if not impossible, because then air would leak in other places instead of only into the lungs through the proper pathways. Okay, last one here, breathing in homeostasis. So breathing is an involuntary process. It's controlled by what we call our autonomic nervous system. And that just means that you can't stop yourself from breathing. Okay, it is an involuntary process. You don't have to think about breathing either. It just happens. But on the other hand, you can kind of control it. Like you can hold your breath if you need to go underwater, but only to a certain limit. Okay, once you reach the limit, your body's going to force yourself to take in air. And also as your heart rate increases, like with vigorous activity, so will your respiratory rate. And that's so that your body stays well fueled with oxygen during those times of need when you're exercising and your muscles or other organs need more energy or more oxygen to do the work. All right, guys, thanks so much. Sorry, my video's not on here. I couldn't get my camera to work. And I'll see you next time.